My name is Gina, and I just graduated from high school. I lived with my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, in a small two-story house on the outskirts of Pennsylvania. Our life was, to put it mildly, modest. My childhood memories are tied to the smell of the old carpet in the living room that no one ever bothered to replace, the creak of the stairs, and a constant sense that there was an invisible scale in our family where one child always outweighed the other. That child was always my brother, Jake. He's 25 now, 7 years older than me, and has been living on his own near the city for a long time. Jake was always the golden child that our parents were proud of. Whenever he became interested in something, our parents turned into an inexhaustible source of resources and support. They bought him the best hockey gear, expensive art supplies, and when he got into skateboarding, they ordered him a custom board, as if he had a future in the sport. All of this happened even though Jake would lose interest after a couple of months and move on to something new. It seemed they simply couldn't say no to him. I, on the other hand, was always somewhere in the shadow of his successes and gifts. One particular incident stands out vividly in my memory. When Jake turned 16, his birthday was a week before Christmas. Our parents gave him the newest gaming computer he had been dreaming about and talking about endlessly. It was an incredibly expensive gift that must have cost them a fortune. And for Christmas, a week later, I received only a card wishing me happy holidays. We ran out of money, my parents explained, and I bit my lip and pretended it didn't bother me. But of course, it did. Years went by, and I got used to this dynamic. Jake's birthdays were always loud celebrations with extravagant gifts and attention, while my modest gatherings boiled down to a small cake, a couple of school supplies, and a dry congratulations. It became something I accepted, and I stopped expecting anything different from my parents a long time ago. So, when they sat me down in the living room last week, just a few days after my graduation, I was stunned. Mom, nervously smoothing out her shirt the way she always did when trying to appear calm, suddenly announced, "We've been thinking, you'll be turning 18 soon. That's a big milestone. We want to throw you a proper party." I nearly choked on my coffee. "A party?" I repeated, thinking I had misheard. My dad, usually calm and reserved, nodded with an unusual enthusiasm. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll invite the whole family and make it a real celebration." I stared at them, trying to figure out the catch. My parents had never shown much interest in my birthdays, and now suddenly, they wanted to throw me a grand celebration. Their smiles looked so forced, their words almost rehearsed. "Why now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, you're graduating high school," Mom said, waving her hand dismissively. "You'll be going to college soon. Things are changing. You're growing up." I nodded slowly, but the unease inside me didn't go away. Their sudden desire to celebrate my birthday felt too unnatural, as though there was something more behind it. Ever since they mentioned the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind the scenes of this newfound care. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. Over the next few days, I began to experience mixed feelings. On one hand, I was warmed by the thought that maybe, just maybe, my parents had decided to finally show they cared. They were ordering an elegant cake, discussing decorations, and preparing for what would be my first real celebration. On the other hand, a strange sense of unease lingered, especially after overhearing a conversation by chance. Mom, as usual, was incredibly busy, making phone calls to the bakery and relatives to discuss details. "Blue or gold banners?" I heard her voice one evening. "Gold, no doubt." She always loved things that looked more expensive than they were. And Dad, he had transformed into the most proactive person I'd ever seen. Usually laid back and indifferent to details, he now seemed to be in a competition with himself, mowing the lawn, fixing the old crooked fence, and even repainting the benches in the yard. It all felt so out of character. One day, I decided to offer Mom some help after spotting her at the kitchen table, which was covered in papers. She quickly clutched them to her chest as I walked in. No, no, sweetheart, we want this to be a surprise. Just relax and enjoy your special day. I shrugged, trying not to show that her words only heightened my suspicion. They were trying so hard to keep me out of the preparations that it couldn't help but seem suspicious. By the way, will Jake be coming? I asked casually as I grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl. Mom froze for a moment but quickly plastered on her usual smile. Of course, he'll be there. He wouldn't miss his little sister's big day. But I knew my brother better than that. He hadn't responded to my messages in over a week, and I could already imagine him being too busy with his life to remember my existence again. 2 days before the party, I woke up in the middle of the night. Thirst drove me to go downstairs for a glass of water. I was already on the stairs when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. David, are you sure everything will be perfect? Mom's voice sounded tense. Your mother is very particular about these things, Dad replied, his voice low and muffled. I froze. Grandma Eleanor was coming? That was unexpected. She lived in Massachusetts and rarely visited us. The last time I saw her was 2 years ago, and even then, her visit had been a big event. Sarah, we need to do this, Dad continued. Your mother needs to see that we're putting in the effort. You know how she reacts when she starts talking about how we spoiled Jake. I know, Mom replied, her voice trembling. She always brings that up. We can't upset her now. The money she gave us last year is the only thing keeping us afloat. Their voices grew quieter, but I had heard enough. Everything suddenly became painfully clear. The party, the attention, the cake, even the spruced-up yard, it had nothing to do with me. It was all a performance for Grandma Eleanor. I stood there on the stairs, feeling my throat tighten with disappointment. Grandma Eleanor had always been different from my parents. She loved Jake, just like everyone else, but she had always found time for me. When she visited, she could listen to my stories for hours, laugh at my jokes that no one else noticed, and even once gave me a book signed with her handwriting, to Gina, so she knows how special she is. Now, all I could do was sit on the top step, feeling the illusion I had almost believed in shatter. This sudden display of care wasn't meant for me. I wasn't the center of attention, I was just part of the backdrop for their attempt to prove something to Grandma. I returned to my room, carefully closing the door, and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. It had been foolish to think things could change. The morning of my 18th birthday began with surprisingly lively voices coming from outside and an overly cheerful tone from my mother, which was so unlike her. Blinking myself awake, I glanced out my bedroom window and froze. Grandma Eleanor's practical Toyota Camry was parked in the driveway, and she was slowly getting out. Her sharp yet elegant outfit, her signature gray lavender handbag slung over her shoulder, and her perfectly styled hair instantly reminded me of the woman she had always been, sophisticated, confident, someone whose opinion the entire family deferred to. I quickly threw on something to wear and rushed downstairs, skipping 2 steps at a time. In the narrow hallway, I nearly collided with Dad, who was carrying some kind of blanket upstairs. But I didn't stop. By the time I burst onto the porch, Grandma was already standing there, surveying our house as if she were assessing its condition. When she saw me, her face lit up with a warm smile rarely seen in our family. "There's my beautiful girl," she exclaimed, spreading her arms wide. I ran to her, and her arms wrapped around me so tightly it felt like she was trying to make up for all the love I hadn't received over the years. Her scent filled me with comfort, freshly baked cookies and the light aroma of lavender soap. "Let me have a look at you," she said, pulling back, her eyes shining. "You're a high school graduate now. What's next, my dear?" Her genuine interest and care moved me. We went into the living room, where Mom had arranged everything to make the room look like it belonged in a home decor magazine. Everything was too perfect, even the cushions on the couch were aligned at identical angles. I sat next to Grandma while my parents nervously took seats across from us, their postures stiff as if they were afraid of making a single wrong move. "Well?" Grandma prompted gently. I glanced away from Mom's piercing gaze and took a deep breath. "I've been accepted to a few colleges," I began, my voice trembling. "2 of them offered me spots." Grandma squeezed my hand, her eyes glowing with pride. "That's wonderful. Tell me about them." "At the state university, they offered me a full scholarship," I said, catching the faint darkening of my parents' expressions out of the corner of my eye. I knew they didn't approve of this option. I hesitated for a moment, gathering my courage. "But there's another option. A very prestigious private school. But tuition there is around $25,000 a year." Grandma nodded thoughtfully, her smile widening just slightly. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression made me feel as though she was already figuring out how to help me. We had only just started our conversation when the doorbell rang. The first guests had arrived, Aunt Marie with Uncle Bob and then noisy kids, followed by more relatives and family friends. Mom was darting around the house, giving orders and playing the part of the perfect hostess, while Dad busied himself at the backyard grill, trying to appear both occupied and relaxed. But one person was missing. Jake. I had tried calling him 3 times, but each time I was sent straight to voicemail. Half an hour later, I approached Mom, who was setting plates on the long table in the garden. "Where's Jake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from sounding too tense. Mom didn't look up, continuing with her task. "Oh, he's busy with his business. Something about a project involving auto parts. But he'll definitely call to congratulate you later." Her answer was as mechanical as her movements. I knew it wasn't true. Jake always found excuses to skip family events unless they benefited him in some way. This time was no different. By midday, the party was in full swing. The backyard was filled with the chatter of relatives, the clinking of glasses, and the delicious aroma of grilled food. Kids ran across the lawn, while adults exchanged the usual remarks about how quickly I'd grown up. Yet I felt like an observer in my own life. Grandma rarely left my side, and I appreciated it more than I could put into words. Her support was quiet but unwavering. She listened when I spoke and always found a way to make me feel important. But everything around me that day felt artificial. From the perfectly arranged napkins to the smiles my parents wore like masks. I tried to enjoy the day, but the feeling of strangeness lingered. My parents acted as though they were invisible satellites orbiting around Grandma Eleanor, constantly attending to her. They made sure her glass was always full and her plate never empty. Their excessive fussing was almost comical if it weren't adding to the tension in the air. I was just finishing a slice of birthday cake, sweet and slightly cloying, when Grandma suddenly stood up and tapped her fork against her glass. The chatter at the tables quieted, and all eyes turned to her. I'd like to say a few words. Her voice was calm yet commanding, effortlessly drawing everyone's attention. The guests sat in silence, waiting for her to continue. "Today, we're celebrating not only Gina's 18th birthday but also her acceptance into college," Grandma said, smiling warmly at me, her eyes glowing with pride. My heart skipped a beat. Her words felt like a ray of light in a day that, until now, had seemed devoid of real meaning. "Gina, my dear," she continued, "I've watched you grow into an incredible young woman. Unlike some people." She paused, and the tension in the air became palpable. I noticed my parents shifting uneasily in their seats, and Mom nervously began tearing at a napkin. "You've always worked hard and never taken anything for granted," Grandma went on. "When you told me about your acceptance into Brington College, I saw how much you wanted to go there, even though you thought it was out of reach." She reached into her handbag, and I held my breath, watching her every movement. Soon, she pulled out an elegant white envelope and stepped toward me. "And so, I decided to give you a special gift." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I carefully opened it and saw a check. The amount made me freeze. My mind refused to believe what I was seeing, and I blinked several times to make sure it wasn't a mistake. $100,000, Grandma said, her voice as steady as if she were merely announcing the price of a loaf of bread. "This should be enough to cover your tuition at Brington." For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then Uncle Bob clapped his hands, followed by others, and soon the backyard was filled with applause and excited cheers. My cousins whooped in encouragement, while Aunt Marie let out a heavy sigh as if she had just seen a ghost. I sat there, frozen in place, clutching the check that felt far too light for the weight it carried. Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and salty. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. A chance. Hope that I could pursue my dream without being buried in debt. "Grandma," I breathed, standing up to hug her. I can't believe this. Thank you so much." She smiled as her warm arms wrapped around me, radiating the support I so desperately needed. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my parents exchanging quick, tense glances. Mom had gone pale, and Dad looked as though he'd just been hit with something heavy. They whispered to each other, their heads almost touching, their eyes flicking repeatedly to the check in my hands. The rest of the evening I spent with Grandma, listening to her stories about her own time at university. She shared memories, gave advice about campus life, and for the first time, I felt like someone in my family was genuinely excited about my future. As the evening wore on, the guests gradually began to leave, leaving behind empty plates, half-full glasses, and paper garlands lazily swaying in the breeze. Grandma Eleanor decided to stay the night, explaining that she was too tired to drive home. I helped her settle into our guest room, grateful for these precious hours of her company. We talked a bit more before she wished me good night. I returned to my room, where I sat in silence for a long time, staring at the check. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, I braced myself for the beginning of a new chapter in our family drama. Grandma hugged me tightly, her warmth and support wrapping around me, and then she left, promising to call soon to help me plan for college. I stood on the porch, watching as her car disappeared around the corner, still unable to fully believe what had happened. Her generosity, her attention, it all felt unreal, like a gift I could neither have expected nor imagined. The whole day, I tried to process my emotions, joy, excitement, and a faint worry about how my family would react to this new situation. It wasn't until the evening, as the sun was setting, that Jake finally appeared on the doorstep. He walked in without knocking, his movements abrupt and his expression sour, like he'd just swallowed a lemon. His designer clothes were carelessly wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes gave him a tired, disheveled look. "Happy birthday, sis," he muttered as he walked past me. He didn't look me in the eye, didn't hug me, and didn't hand over even a card or a token gift. Instead, he headed straight to the kitchen, leaving me standing in the hallway with an unpleasant sense of emptiness. That evening, at the dinner table, the tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jake sat slouched in his chair across from me, lazily scrolling through his phone. Mom nervously adjusted the tablecloth, while Dad cleared his throat several times, clearly preparing to say something. "Gina, sweetheart, we need to talk," he finally said, setting his fork aside. "Your brother is going through a tough time right now." I stiffened, already sensing that this conversation would not end well. His auto parts business, well, things aren't going as he planned. Hearing this, Jake abruptly lifted his head from his phone. His face was tense, and his voice came out rough. "The banks are breathing down my neck. I took out a few loans to expand the business, but the market collapsed, and now they want their money back." I couldn't help but let out a sarcastic chuckle, even though there was nothing funny about the situation. Really? And how do you explain those pictures from Hawaii last month? By the way, there were so many girls with you I lost count. Jake shot me a dark look. Stay out of my social media, he snapped, his voice trembling with irritation. It's none of your business. Enough, both of you, Dad interrupted, raising a hand to calm us. This is serious, Gina. Your brother could lose everything. I pushed my plate away. My appetite was gone. What does this have to do with me? I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, their expressions so loaded with meaning that it was clear they had rehearsed this conversation in advance. Gina, dear, family helps family, Mom began, her voice soft but with an undertone I recognized all too well. That's what we've always taught you, right? My heart sank. I was starting to understand where this was going. We thought, Dad continued, that the money Grandma gave you could help Jake get out of this situation. I stared at them, unable to believe what I had just heard. You want me to give Jake the money for my college? My voice was quiet, but anger was already simmering inside me. Jake straightened up in his chair, looking more animated than he had all evening. Business is important, he said, gesturing with his hand. It's more serious than some degree you might never even use. That money is for my education. I protested, my voice rising. Grandma gave it to me specifically for Brinton. Mom crossed her arms, frowning. You have every right to go to a state university, she said. That's a good option too. But Jake needs the money now. No, my no came out so firm it seemed to freeze the air in the room. I clenched my fists. That money is mine. Grandma gave it to me because I earned it. And I won't let you force me to give up my dream for Jake. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake opened his mouth, trying to say something, but no words came out. Mom and Dad looked as though I had just broken an unspoken family law. But I no longer cared. Grandma took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment as she spoke to my father over the phone. David, you and Sarah have forgotten what it means to be parents. You've created an environment where one child is always at the center of attention, and the other is barely noticed. I'm tired of your games. Dad tried to argue, his voice on the other end of the line sounding pleading. Mom, you misunderstood. We were just trying to do the best we could for both kids. Jake needs our support, his business. But Grandma cut him off, her voice colder than steel. Enough. It doesn't matter. You want Gina to sacrifice her future to fix your mistakes. I won't allow this charade to continue any longer. I watched her, unable to look away, feeling a strange sense of safety rising within me. No one had ever stood up for me like this before. From now on, Grandma continued, I will take care of Gina myself. The money I gave her will remain hers. If you or Jake try to interfere, I will be forced to take legal action. I won't tolerate your behavior any longer. You can't just take her away. Dad shouted, his voice trembling with rage. She's our daughter. Then start acting like parents, Grandma replied sharply. She pressed the button to end the call, cutting him off before he could say anything more. I still couldn't fully process what had just happened. Her determination left me stunned. Gina, Grandma turned to me, her eyes softening. I know this is hard for you right now. But you're home. No one will hurt you here. I couldn't hold back the tears. All the tension of the past days, fear, pain, anger, spilled out. I hugged her as tightly as I could, whispering through my sobs. Thank you for everything. She stroked my head gently until I calmed down, then led me to the kitchen. Over a cup of hot tea, we started discussing plans for my future. The next morning, Grandma took me to the bank to open an account in my name and deposit the check. She insisted that I secure my finances. After that, we visited the college admissions office together to confirm my enrollment and go over the details of my housing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control over my own destiny. Every little detail, from choosing a dorm to planning my schedule, filled me with a quiet sense of joy. However, memories of my family still weighed on me. I couldn't forget how my father had grabbed my wrist, how they had tried to force me to give up everything I had earned. "Don't think about that, dear," Grandma said, noticing my distracted expression. "You're starting a new life. This is your chance, and I will do everything in my power to make sure no one takes it away from you." Her words became an anchor for me. I knew there would still be many challenges ahead, but at that moment, I understood one thing: I was no longer alone. That evening, I wrote a letter to my parents. It was short and to the point. "Mom, Dad, I didn't leave to hurt you, but because I had no other choice. I deserve the right to my future. You made your choice when you decided to prioritize Jake's needs over mine. Now I am making mine. Please do not try to interfere in my life. Gina." I didn't know how they would react, but it no longer mattered. The next day, I began preparing for my move to Brington. Grandma insisted on coming with me to help me settle in. We spent a few days shopping for everything I might need, from textbooks to new clothes. On the last evening before my departure, I stood by the window in her house, staring at the stars. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head, but one thing I knew for certain: my life had changed. Grandma came up behind me and put her arm around my shoulders. "You'll be okay, Gina," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "You're stronger than you think." And I believed her. I sat at a corner table in the university cafe, trying to maintain my composure. My parents sat across from me, looking noticeably subdued and resigned, though I knew it was only a facade. Since leaving home, I had learned to read their intentions the way someone reads a familiar book. Even so, meeting with them was a trial I couldn't avoid. Mom reached for my hand, but I kept my palms tightly clasped on my lap, refusing to let her bridge the distance with fleeting gestures. "You look well," she began, her voice quiet, almost pleading. I nodded, offering nothing in return. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. My voice was calm, but inside, everything churned. This meeting was a test, not just for them, but for me as well. Dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "We wanted to apologize," he started. "We were wrong." His words hung in the air as I watched him muster the courage to continue. "Wrong to try and take your college money. Wrong to threaten you. Wrong about so many things." His voice sounded sincere, but I knew it was only part of the story. They always came with apologies that masked hidden intentions. "And?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. They exchanged quick glances. Mom began to speak, but Dad cut her off. "We were hoping that maybe you could talk to Grandma about her will." Everything inside me froze. I had expected something like this, but it still hit me like a cold shower. "We're not asking for your money anymore," Dad continued, his voice careful, almost measured. "We just hoped you could help us repair our relationship with her." I barely held back a bitter laugh. "No," I replied firmly and succinctly. They stared at me, waiting for an explanation, but I had none to give. "If you want to fix things with Grandma, you'll have to talk to her yourselves. I'm not getting involved." Mom tensed, her expression hardening. "Gina, it's not that simple. You know how she is. She won't listen to us." "Then you'll have to try harder," I replied, holding her gaze. Dad looked disappointed but tried to remain composed. "We just want to make things right," he said, his voice softening. "This is for our family." "Make things right?" I repeated, almost incredulously. "You didn't think about making things right, when you threatened me, when you tried to steal my future. This isn't my problem anymore." They exchanged another glance, and I could see their patience wearing thin. "So that's it?" Mom asked, her words dripping with resentment. "You're not going to help your family at all?" Her words were meant to sting, but they no longer had any effect on me. "You're the ones who chose the path that divided us," I said. "If you want to fix something, start with yourselves." They fell silent, and I used the moment to stand up. "I have a lecture in an hour," I said, grabbing my bag. "Good luck with Grandma. You'll need it." Mom muttered something under her breath, but I wasn't listening. As I stepped out of the cafe, the cool campus air hit my face. Despite the slight tremble in my body, I felt strong. The meeting had been hard, but it was necessary. That evening, when I told Grandma everything, she smiled at me, a look of pride in her eyes. "You handled that well, dear," she said, wrapping me in a hug. "Sometimes, boundaries are the best thing we can set." I realized her words were true. For the first time in my life, I was in control of my destiny. My family could try to pressure me, but now I knew I had the strength to say no. As I gathered my things, I cast one last glance at my parents, still sitting at the cafe table. "You know what's funny?" I began, holding back a bitter laugh. "When you wanted my college money, you talked about family. About how family helps family. But somehow, it always only worked one way. You never helped me." They said nothing, and I turned and walked away, feeling a growing sense of relief with each step. That conversation was the last thread connecting me to their manipulations. 2 months had passed since my first semester at Brinton began. The coursework was challenging but incredibly exciting, and I finally felt like I'd found my place. However, one day disrupted my carefully built routine. I received a call from Aunt Marie. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Aunt Marie had always been closer to Mom and rarely took any interest in my life. But something in her persistence made me pick up the call. "Gina, are you sitting down?" Her voice sounded strangely hushed, as though she was sharing secrets only she was privy to. "What happened?" I asked, unsure of what to expect. "I think you need to know what's going on at home," she replied. My heart skipped a beat. "Jake's business has completely collapsed," she said. "He owes the banks hundreds of thousands of dollars. He's moved back in with your parents." I froze, letting the information sink in. Mighty Jake, who had always looked down on me, back in his childhood bedroom. It seemed almost unbelievable. "Your parents," Aunt Marie continued, "they're spending their retirement savings to help him with his debts. They've even taken out a second mortgage on the house." I thanked her for the update and hung up. My mind spun with thoughts of how much they were willing to sacrifice for Jake while completely ignoring their own future. Later that same week, Grandma called me. Her voice sounded tired. "I had visitors today," she said. "Your parents. They came begging me to help with Jake's debts. They said they were going to lose everything." "What did you say to them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I told them no. They need to figure this out on their own." I heard her sigh on the other end of the line. "Your mother cried, and your father got angry. But Gina, these are the consequences of their choices, and I won't let them manipulate me." Her words were firm but fair. That fall, I visited Grandma during my school break. We baked pies together and talked about my coursework. She had even set up a separate guest room for me so I could focus on my studies. "I'm so proud of you," she said as she glanced over my midterm grades. "Thank you, Grandma," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. I hesitated before asking the question that had been weighing on my mind for some time. "Do you ever regret cutting ties with them?" She paused her knitting, looking at me seriously, her eyes radiating wisdom and certainty. Not for a second, she said. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people is to let them face the consequences of their actions. I knew she was right. Every time I heard about my family's financial struggles, a small part of me felt guilt. But then I remembered all the years I was overlooked, every Christmas when all I got was a card while Jake received expensive gifts. Everything was different now. I was studying at a prestigious university, building my future, making friends, and living life on my terms. While my parents and Jake continued to deal with the fallout of their choices, I began to understand that it wasn't my job to fix their mistakes. It never had been. The last I heard about Jake was that he was pitching some new business idea to relatives. My parents, of course, were looking for ways to fund it. Some patterns are hard to break. But one thing I knew for certain, thanks to Grandma and her unwavering belief in me, I had broken free from those patterns. My life was my own now.